Welcome to Practical Property Management. This podcast is dedicated for property management and real estate sales for do-it-yourselfers, for first-time property managers that are doing it themselves, along with FSBOs, people who want to sell their own home. So today we're talking with Kyle from City Real Estate. I'm Al from 828homerentals.com, and we're just going to talk a little bit about security deposits, normal wear and tear, HUD guidelines, COVID, all sorts of great stuff. I'm looking forward to getting into this with you, Kyle.
I am too. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. The title of this show is Practical Property Management, and I wanted to talk a little bit about security deposits today. It seems to be the end-all, be-all for not only owners and clients, but for tenants and customers.
Totally.
Right? Tenants always want them back. Owners always want to keep them. So I kind of wanted to couple that in with some information for do-it-yourself homeowners that are renting out their houses.
Okay.
Kind of first-time landlords, so to
Sure.
speak. And if they want to take a security deposit, how much can they take? What can they use it for? Actually, practical applications of that. Because all too often, I've run into my clients, at least, that think that they're entitled to all of it.
Totally.
There's a scratch in the floor. There's some marks on the wall. The house isn't exactly like they left it 5 years ago. And having to explain what normal wear and tear is, HUD guidelines, and all that kind of stuff.
Having to discuss the lifespan of a paint job or lifespan of carpet, or, that's a conversation that always gets really tricky.
Sure.
We don't want to replace the carpet, but it's been down for 10 years.
That's it.
What can you use?
But you want maximum rent.
I was about to say, but you want as much money as you can get.
Yeah. So over the years, I know you've been doing this a while at City Real Estate, right? And I've got a few years in the business.
Yeah.
And over time, I've found more and more that being proactive as a property manager has helped me reduce the amount of times that I have to tell one of my clients that they're incorrect in their line of thinking.
Right.
What are some of the things that you've done to keep down deferred maintenance and having to have those discussions?
We're really big on inspections. We try to I hate to say quarterly because the tenants hate it. But
quarterly.
I try to be in a house at least 3 times at least 3 to 4 times in your tenancy, and then I also have when the maintenance people come in, they report back.
Oh, you're making me look bad.
Well, it's because we've had some really crappy stuff happen.
Sure.
And when the bad things happen, it makes us want to study up even more. I was a renter, not too long ago. I bought my first house last year. So getting able to look at it from the tenant side and now as the property manager side, that's totally different because there's so much that goes into it, I think, on the back end.
Sure.
As a tenant, you get your receipt back and you go, well, why did I only get this much? But there's a lot of groundwork that goes into making it what you want it to be as the owner and what you want to get from that deposit. But I think the biggest thing really is we have all of our people who are in the house, electricians, plumbers, our in-house maintenance tech, Ingrid. Anytime they go in a house, they come back and have a little report that they fill out.
That's it. You're spies.
Yeah, totally.
Yep.
Totally. And
Yep.
when tenants know that we're coming, my business partner and I, they clean up and everything is wiped down and put in its place, but
They don't do that for the maintenance guy.
no.
Nope.
No, not at all.
The secret's out now. All you tenants out there.
Please, if you're a tenant of mine, stop listening. Stop listening. Tune out.
So some of the realistic expectations of maintenance, one of the biggest things that I can tell a client beforehand, and I've said this before many times, is prepare your house for rental. If you're going into the rental business, you bought a house to do it, or you're moving out of your house and you're going to turn your house into a rental, prepare it for that. Because carpet takes wear, bad paint jobs take wear faster, bad appliances, old appliances, things that just break, and you're setting yourself up for deferred maintenance.
Right.
And when you come in and that floor that you've had in your house that was carpeted when you bought it, and you've lived there for 5 years, and then the tenant stains it, there's HUD guidelines that we have to go with.
Absolutely.
So things like 100% waterproof vinyl flooring with the lifetime warranty.
Saved my life.
That's it. That's it. Anytime that someone comes to us with a carpet, as soon as we can, as soon as it's reached its lifespan, we always recommend taking it out and putting this in. Better appliances can last a lot longer. things like that, so that way you don't have to deal with it. For instance, even the type of paint, using an eggshell paint on the walls and semi-gloss on the trim can save you from having to paint your house again.
And it gets pricey. The worse that it is, the worse, the more deferred it's been, the more expensive it will be to fix it. So, get in there while you can and just knock it out, and it'll save you some money in the long run.
That's it. I think the worst part for us is that when an owner has to repaint the house, that doesn't equate to higher rent.
Right.
You didn't just improve your house. You just got it back to normal.
Okay. So, the dreaded conversation of they go, well, I just put a new roof on. Well, a tenant needs a roof.
Yeah.
That's not impressive for them.
That's
it's the same thing with some of that aesthetic stuff.
Sure.
You got new cabinets, and that's awesome. You have to have them in the kitchen. You just brought it up to the standard that you want. You brought it up to the price point you're hoping to get.
That's it. So painting, pressure washing, carpets, lawn care, gutters, these kind of routine, either taking care of them as an owner, even if it's not your responsibility. Even if an owner tells me, a client tells me that the tenant should be responsible for gutter cleaning. I am still going to recommend that we send someone out to clean the gutters twice a year.
Yep.
Because if the tenant doesn't do it, the results from that can be disastrous. And no matter what, you can't get that money out of them. I mean, even if you can prove it's the tenant's fault and the tenant ends up in a lawsuit, chances are they can't afford to put a new roof on your house.
Right.
So my message to owners, I think, has always been take it upon yourself to protect your investment. Hiring someone like you or like me who knows what they're doing, have been through some of the horror stories, so we know how to prevent that stuff. Or don't expect your tenant to do everything. Though I work for clients that own houses, the tenant's my customer, but sometimes the tenant is right. Sometimes it's not their job.
Right.
Sometimes it's not their fault. Have you run into stuff like that where you've had to kind of, even though you work for the client, explain to them that the tenant isn't responsible for
all
this?
All the time. We're actually in it right now. And something that you and I talked about on the phone was kind of the hindrance of having long-term tenants, and I'm sure that's something we'll get into. But I find that relates directly to security deposits. We had a couple of tenants who were in here in a house, I think, for 10 years, and we only started managing it the last 2, I think, or maybe a year and a half. And so not only did we not hold the security deposit, it was only $800.
Sure.
So after having really stellar tenants for 10 years, the owners came in and are really trying to get every dollar out of that deposit. And it's been a really hard conversation to say, you just can't. You can't. If you go to court, tenants can sue for 3 times it's a whole thing. But really having to sit down and say, okay, these tenants were in here in 2009.
Yeah.
You haven't done any work when you lived in it. I mean, we're looking at carpet that is upwards of 15 years, and the owners are really we're meeting a lot of resistance trying to explain that.
That's part of the job, though. It might even be the harder part of the job of all the things that we have to deal with, and negativity and attitudes and people who feel like they're being treated maybe unfairly, especially with COVID and all this other external pressure. You're the professional.
Well, and wouldn't you agree that it really, with security deposits, we are the middleman. Our job as property managers, obviously, we work for the owners, but we deal a lot with the tenants. But when it comes to a 4-figure number, people really get touchy, and so it's doing the dance of presenting the owner with the information that they need, because ultimately they have the last say. I can give you my opinion, but you're going to do kind of what you want.
Sure.
But having to be the pass-through to the tenant, saying you may not get all your money back, here is why. If they're not happy with it, obviously they come to us, and then we go to the owner. And it's just really interesting to look at it from both perspectives when people are not agreeing about how and where the money should be allocated.
So I think you and I might do deposits differently, though we both end up on the same end. For my clients, I explain to them at the inception of our relationship that I'm going to handle it. that it's going to be my responsibility because I'm going to be the one who gets the blame if it goes wrong. I'm the one who's got to take the heat on social media or deal with all the blowback. So we stay up front. We're the authority on this. And we are. We study normal wear and tear. We're kept up to date. We go to the HUD meetings. We know how long a carpet's lifespan is in a multifamily home rented to non-seniors versus seniors. These are things that you and I are versed in, and if we're not versed in, we have a great book, so we can be at the moment versed in it.
Right.
But some of the long-term tenancies create more of that, and normal wear and tear is a thing. It's the government. To put it in layman's terms, it's the cost of occupying a space. Just living, us sitting here is causing wear on the microphones, wear on the chairs. It's not a lot.
Right, but it's use.
Right. So you multiply that by actually living in a space, and then multiply that by living in a space for 5 years. Normal wear and tear gets larger. The gap gets bigger and bigger every year they're there.
Right.
So suddenly a stain in the carpet on year 1 is not the same as a stain in the carpet on year 5.
Sure.
It still might have been negligence by the tenant, but the law dictates that you may not be able to charge it to the tenant because the carpet's past its lifespan,
right,
and you're charging them for something you're going to tear out and replace anyways.
Let's talk about broom swept clean. Can we talk about cleaning and deposits?
Do it.
How do you handle that?
So
North Carolina law is broom swept clean, isn't it?
Yeah. It's so
what owners say, what does that mean?
So again, going back to the government standards, there's a cost to doing business. Just like when you rent a car and you bring it back, you got to bring it back clean.
Right.
You don't have to get it waxed. You don't have to take it to the detail shop and have them
That's
shampoo the carpets.
Fantastic analogy.
But there might be some dirt on the floor. There might be a candy wrapper under the seat. But you did your best to turn the car in its best condition possible. And I think that transfers over to renting. If you cleaned the house and it's clean and it needs to be professionally cleaned on top of that as a duty of the owner, then that's on the owner.
Right.
A great word that we used in the last firm that I worked for to describe that kind of stuff is restorative. Is it restorative? Because if you go to court and say, man, they left the house dirty, and you show a picture of a floor and you can't see the dirtiness of the floor,
you're done.
You're done, yeah. So if there's crap everywhere, if they left their stuff all over the place, if they obviously didn't sweep, didn't mop, didn't even try, they just dropped the mic, left the key on the table and walked out, then they're going to owe for some cleaning.
Can I tell you that I had that happen on last week, last
Tell
Thursday?
Me about it.
Tenant woke up to an email, 5:16 in the morning. I'm definitely not a morning person.
Right.
Definitely not a morning person before 7.
Sure.
Hey, we moved to Florida. Keys on the counter. I know I'm in a lease until May, but I took a job.
Right.
Okay. So we go in. House is supposed to be empty. Stuff is everywhere. So not only from the security deposit will we be doing a clean, we're doing a trash haul. The place is absolutely wrecked, and so this is a really good kind of like real-time practice of what and how a security deposit can be allocated. We have double security. Some of it's going to have to cover rent. Some of it's going to have to cover the damage that's there above the trash haul and the cleaning.
And then you have the rest of the rent on the lease before it's released.
Yeah.
In the state of North Carolina, for the type of leasing we do, long-term leasing, we can take up to 2 months rent.
Yes.
It's always been a standard where I've worked to do 1.5 months. You took 2 months in this situation. It was a good call. Was there a reason for that, or is that just your standard?
Yeah. No. Typically, it's 1 month's rent. But we base it off of the background and credit report.
Okay.
So if my analogy is like, if it's a red flag, you're denied. Evictions, obviously no go. But if there's something on the report that's like a yellow flag or like an orange flag, not necessarily grounds for denial, but kind of raises an eye, then we'll increase it for sure.
We've always done 1.5 times rent.
I love that.
I think it's good because it doesn't kill the tenant. It's not 2 months rent on top of your first month's rent, on top of your pet deposit and your moving costs and turning on the electric, which is what you could charge as a landlord. But you have enough so if the tenant does bail a month early, does do what happened to you just recently, you have at least 1 month's rent to cover and you have a half a month's rent to help with the damages, which typically will make your client whole or whole enough where you can get it released and get money flowing again.
I think I'm Might take that. I'm going to steal that idea. That's great.
Awesome, man. Well, so do you find what just happened to you is an exception, not the rule, though?
Right.
As a property manager, we have these awesome horror stories. Like we drink for a reason.
Right.
And it's a valid reason.
It's a very valid reason.
But most of the time,
Really great.
Do you find that you're giving? I found that I was giving most of the time 100% deposits back for at least the year before COVID. Through COVID as well, that's a different year, and I don't want it to be associated with security deposit dispositions. But prior, when things were normal, I felt like the last couple cycles, more and more people were leaving the house in good condition. And remember, HUD changed it to broom swept clean. Like I don't know if they changed it, but they redefined it. They made it more blunt, like, hey, you cannot charge a tenant if they clean the house and there's just some dust bunnies and some baseboard stuff.
They make it very clear. We, for the most part, we give most of it back.
Right.
I think that has to do, though, with how well we vet the tenants.
Sure.
I mean, everything can turn a corner really quickly, but if you really take the application process seriously and you're sticking true to your rental criteria, most of the time those tenants are going to leave it like they found it.
Sure, or better, right?
Or better. Well, I haven't seen better. I haven't seen better yet.
I hear that a lot, though. I left it better than I found it. It's the common phrase. If you're a tenant and you're going to say that, know that we make jokes about that.
We write your name on a list.
We do. It's common. I think, though, that the dirty secret for me, though, is that I enjoy giving 100% of your deposit back. And it's not just because I get to give it back to you. It's because I didn't have to do any work.
I was about to say, it's a win-win.
Yeah, when you leave the house damaged or dirty or something's wrong and I have to go fix it, I have to call contractors, subcontractors. I got to get people out there to get estimates. I got to get them approved. I have to manage the job. I have to do all that while I'm telling my client why the house isn't being rented and explaining why we put a tenant in there that left it that way to begin with.
Those are hard phone calls.
And so the work that we do is exponential. If you leave the house clean, you've done your duty as a tenant and alerted me to any type of maintenance that you may not be responsible for, but you know is happening. Typically, you make my life so much easier, especially when I have 15 of those happening on the same day of the month. Right? So even though we're looked at sometimes through like the social media eye as we're the devil, we're the most hated among landlords.
Sure.
I like having an easy relationship with tenants. I like giving them their money back. I don't like charging them late fees. I like coming into work and not having a drinking habit.
Right. Listen, that's the ideal situation. We get a great tenant in. You live in the house really well. The owner never hears from us. We just deliver a check to them. And then you leave the house and it looks great and we give you your money back.
The reality is, though, we would be out of a job if everyone did that.
True. They wouldn't need us,
That's why they hire us, because it's hard to do. It's hard to look somebody in the eye and let them know you're taking some money out of their check because of the damage they did when you know that they might not be in a great spot in life. It can be very taxing on the heart.
Yeah. Yes, it definitely can. But again, for me, I have to remind myself, like, I don't work for the tenant. The owner is who signs my check, essentially. And what you have done as the tenant, whether you've left the house early and broken the lease, whether the house is a total shit show when you left, this is. I told the tenant that left the other day. She said, I hate that it happened this way. And I said, well, I do too, of course. But ultimately, this is a decision that you made, and because you made it, it cannot negatively affect the owner. She had nothing to do with this. So, it's.
It is. It's a rough one, and that's why I wanted to tackle this one first. Right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times I find that I take on new clients because of bad tenants. That's literally my best advertising is somebody who rented to a tenant. They became kind of friendly with them. The tenant fell on bad times, started paying rent late, started getting later and later, started owing more and more money, and then the relationship started to fall apart between the two because the owner wanted to get paid, but the tenant couldn't or didn't pay.
Yeah.
And then my phone rings.
Yeah.
And there is a frustrated owner that has one rental property, and they've got this friend. I get the story a lot. It's their friend now that just kind of hasn't been paying rent on time and is not being communicative. And what do they do? How do they fix this?
Right.
And can you sign them up? Can you can you take me on as a client and help me? And the sad answer that I've learned to give is no.
Right.
No, I will take on your client when you clear the slate. So if you want to forgive them of everything they've done wrong and start over from scratch, that's the only way I can take one on, because I can't do anything about what's been done prior to me, right?
Well, and not only that, but it will involve the owner somehow. So
Sure.
I'll be here and I can help, but you're also going to have to show up. It doesn't relinquish you of being involved.
Sure. I give a lot of advice.
Advice.
My phone always rings. I always give advice. It's important to know that we're not lawyers, though, right? We are property managers. When we do our job properly, we're in control of all aspects, and we can properly handle all that.
Yeah.
But when it doesn't relate to us, sometimes you need legal advice instead of advice from somebody like us.
Well, and I think I'm glad that you're doing this, because it's the owners that have one or two properties that think that they can do it and think that property management is just, I'm going to get some good people in there and I'm going to get a check. It's not how it happens. And if you don't think that it will turn sour, it will. I promise. At some point,
right? Yeah.
At some point,
Yep.
regardless of the severity, something damage, unpaid rent, someone holding over and living, squatting in the house. So many things can happen.
Sure.
And it's what did you say on the phone the other day? It's owning an investment property
It's not a passive investment.
It's not a passive investment. And I think that people think that it is. And so when they run into a problem and then you get into the legalities of security deposits, that's when they call, because they go, oh, I have to be a bit more involved than I had originally thought.
Most people don't know how technical it is, right? They just rent out their house, they take a month deposit, everything's going great, the roof starts to leak, they try to handle it, and somehow, somewhere, something gets out of hand, and they don't realize how bad it can go.
Right.
So moving forward, though, when to a landlord who is ending their lease with a tenant, and they do need to make security disposition items, like they need to take money from the tenant. You and we do photos and walkthroughs and document, like everything is documented.
Everything.
But a normal landlord may not do that, right? I've known so many people that call me with their houses, and I go through that same scenario I just went through. I finally take them on, and the tenant leaves the place trashed.
Right.
And it's not all the time, but I'm talking about the extreme cases. And there's nothing I can do, though, because the owner says I gave it to him in perfect condition. I can't prove that.
I have no way
I believe you.
Totally.
Right.
So that's a hard conversation, is I don't think you're lying.
Right.
I don't think you're lying.
Right.
I bet it looks like crap, and I bet you didn't give them this house in that condition. But we have nothing to go off of.
So what do you say to that owner if they're listening right now, they're thinking about renting out their house, what do they do before they have a tenant come in?
I use an app called Z Inspector.
I do too.
Do you
It's
really?
amazing.
Do you really?
Yeah, I just downloaded it.
I love it. I love it. Yep. It is incredibly thorough. You can edit and add or take away as much as you'd like. But for someone who doesn't, I have a peripheral idea of maintenance now that I've been doing this for almost 5 years. But I'm not a contractor. I can't fix a cabinet you know what I mean? It's just not me. So having some sort of template that says go through every cabinet, check every lock on the door, check the locks on the window, being able to have something that tells me to what and how to document it has saved my life.
Yeah, so
because it's so hard to miss stuff.
Yeah.
It's so hard to miss stuff. There's no way you're going to get everything.
I think the takeaway too is if you're doing this on your own, whether it's your first time or your 10th time, that there are apps out. Z Inspector's free for like the first so many
10 inspections.
Houses. Yeah, so you can download this app for free. It'll take pictures, itemize it all. And I'm not pitching Z Inspector here. Snap Inspect does it. There's a ton. Bunch of apps. You can just Google it. You'll come up with a ton of stuff. But it'll put it all together in one PDF. And you can have Z Inspector at least gives you the opportunity to have the new tenant sign it. So now you have some documentation, not only documentation, but stuff that's been signed by the tenant that allows both of you to start off on page one.
Not only that, but what a beautiful thing to send to the owner.
Sure.
To say not only have I done a really thorough inspection of your house, which is what you're paying me to do,
right?
But you will see everything that we're going to charge for, and also, let's talk. I'm curious how you guys do this because I think we do it in kind of a screwed up way, maybe. I do. I'm not sure if it's like the most efficient.
I feel like I've been there.
Oh God. So, the woman that left, I'm just going to use her as an example. We had to have obviously a really difficult conversation with the owner. Hey, I know you thought you were going to have a tenant since until June, but guess what, girl? You ain't getting it. Yeah, you ain't getting it. Not only are you not getting rent, the house is
send us some money.
Yeah. So it's like, your house needs a paint job. Someone punched holes in the walls, threw knives at the door. Obviously, we're going to go after her for that. But the painter has to get paid.
I'm laughing because of the throw knives at the door. Is that a thing? Because I've had a couple houses that had a knife.
This is the first house I've seen that happen.
I've had two that had knife throwing walls. At least it looked that way. I mean, if I was to guess, somebody was chucking a knife.
Yes, laying on their bed, just tossing it.
What? Is that a thing in Asheville?
I think it's like worrisome.
You cannot do that, tenants. Do not do that.
Psychiatric evaluation needed to happen. But I had to call the owner and say, the paint job and the repair and everything is going to be $3,800, and the house is a wreck. And this is a great example. Most of it is going to be charged to the tenant because she was only there for 3 years.
Eventually.
And it was a new paint job when she moved in. Oh man. So there is no lifespan of something when you're the new first recipient.
Yeah. Well,
so
when it's restorative too. I mean, it's absolutely destroyed.
Oh God, it's absolutely destroyed. It's so bad. But having to tell the owner, like, not only is the security deposit not going to cover it all, we're going to come to you because we pay the owner or we pay the painter out of our money, and then we get it from you.
Yeah.
So, if the tenant isn't going to pay for it and you don't want to pay for it now, it's just not going to get painted.
So you do that a little bit different than I do too. So we will not spend, and I don't think we can, our own money. Mm-hmm. So we'll use the reserve money that the owner gave us. But if it exceeds the reserve, a normal reserve for a house is $500, at least in my business.
Yeah.
$300 to $500. It's not a ton of money
at all.
And it's only for normal maintenance. These are the extremes, and these are the exceptions, not the rule.
Right.
But this is why you pay somebody to do it for you, right? So they can handle it all. So not only would I have to call my client and explain they're not getting rent, but they have to pay these bills. They have to transfer $2,000, $3,000.
So tell me about those conversations. Obviously the owner is never thrilled.
No,
no one ever goes, oh my God, great. I'm super excited. I got to pay something.
Like most people, I think it takes a second to sink in whenever you get any type of, whether it's exciting or horrible news. You always are better the next day with it.
Right.
So we typically put it in a writing. We put it in an email first, and then I call immediately because I like to rip the Band-Aid off. I'm the type of person that if I have bad news or there's some type of confrontation that's going to happen, I'd rather be the first one to it.
Right.
I just want to get it out of the way and move on with my day.
Yep.
So most investor clients are very non-emotional. Mm-hmm. They go, well, that happens. Get it fixed. Let me know how much I owe you. If they've been in the business long enough, they know it's going to happen.
Right.
They just are waiting for it. They normally have a fund for it. They're set up for it, and they've been through it before, so it's not new.
Walk me through, though, the owners who this is their childhood home.
Yeah, so I've had it go all the way bad where we've just parted ways. Where I've explained it, they didn't want to understand. Their reaction stayed emotional instead of coming back to rational and focusing on the numbers. And there was disagreements over whatever it was. Normal human intuition, especially nowadays, seems to go to blaming somebody. Mm-hmm. When something bad happens, we always want to know whose fault is it. It has to be someone's fault.
Right.
And inevitably, as a property manager, it's always comes back to us. And the reality is our profession, the buck stops with us, right? We put the tenant in there. We didn't do the quarterly walkthrough like you did.
Yeah.
We let it get to that point. And even if we didn't, and the tenant just went off her meds or his meds, or they just lost their job and freaked out and spiraled out of control, it's our job to be able to handle both the client and the client's needs, do it legally, professionally, try to stay sane through the whole process. The only thing you can do is just be upfront and honest. I find communication is probably the number one complaint I hear from people who are calling me that may be with another property management company. Because as soon as someone calls me and says they have a property manager, they're looking for a new one, there's a red flag goes off.
Right.
Because I know property management, and you might have a property manager who's not doing their job, but maybe they are doing their job and you just don't like what they're doing.
Right, what they legally can do.
Right. But the number one complaint that I hear is communication. They didn't tell me. They let it sit. Somebody was scared or too busy or just didn't want that extra stress in their life of calling the owner,
right.
which is a horrible decision.
Right.
Horrible. Even if it's bad news, it's your job. Just like in real estate, as a sales agent or a buyer's agent or a listing agent, you have to just to tell your client. They're going to get mad. They're going to freak out. It's going to be rough. You're going to have an extra drink that night. But you got to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the longer I would try to put those conversations off when I first started. I'd be like, oh my God, I do not want to call him. I just don't. It's going to be so hard. But I found that the longer you wait, the more things happen in between.
Well, it's not your fault to begin with. And I've said this.
That's hard, though.
I've said this to people at the last firm that I worked at. It's not your fault now, right? The things that happened at the house, it's not your fault. It's your job to handle them. Mm-hmm. But what happens is it becomes your fault if you don't tell the client, because now you did something wrong.
Right.
You waited.
Right.
You didn't call.
Right.
And so now the client has someone to be mad at. You.
Right.
And you work for them. So not only are they mad at you, but they're in a position of power over you. So you're probably going to get yelled at, which nobody likes, right? Especially in our job. 90% of our job is being a little bit more strict and forward, especially with a tenant who is upset they paid rent late or doesn't want to let you in for a walkthrough. Those confrontational moments in our job, they're normal.
Have you had confrontational moments with owners regarding security deposits? Al, you gave this much back, and I don't agree with that.
Yes. Yeah.
How does that go?
We have just provided documentation. The way I talk to an owner when they're questioning a deposit is the rule of thumb for me is if you can stand in front of a judge and defend it, and you feel good about defending it, then it's probably okay.
Right.
But if you're going to get up and say that the wood frame single pane window that was put in 1953 isn't closing properly in 2020 and you've never done any maintenance to it, and you're going to charge the tenant for that, it's going to be a hard sell, especially for Judge Joe here in town, because though he's straightforward.
Yeah.
If it's not the tenant's fault, then it's not the tenant's fault.
So, yes, I agree. I think that's kind of what's intimidating, though, for owners that maybe don't know, is like the idea of going to court. Some of them think they're going to get their money like.
Well, they're used to court on TV.
Instantaneous. Right. This is not just Judy.
This is not Judge Judy.
Judy's at home.
Right.
You got Joe.
Right.
You got Joe.
What about pest control? This is one that I've run into several times. I have my specific protocols on it, but what is mice in a home a tenant's fault, or not?
Most of the time, not. From my experience,
I agree.
Particularly, I mean, we're in Western North Carolina. You're gonna have critters are around, especially when you get back into these properties on wooded lots, and something's gonna come through. If I send the electrician in and they come back and they go, "Oh my, you got to get in there." That's crazy.
Right.
That's
Looks
that's
like
a little
frat party just
totally
happened every night.
Yeah, that's a little different.
Sure.
There's probably cause for that, but most of our single family houses are houses that are built in the 60s to 90s, and just kind of comes with the territory, I think.
I think so. I think that mice or rodent problems are just a result of the home aging. Some cracks, some holes, the crawl space door inevitably doesn't shut right or rots out.
Yep. Have you guys had any crazy thing with fleas? Have you had some crazy flea stories?
Yeah,
so
fleas. It's in our is it in our maintenance agreement? It's in our lease or our tenant manual that requires tenants to have flea treatment when they move out. Mm-hmm. And
that's fantastic.
I tell tenants, though, all I really want is somebody to sign off saying there's no fleas. You can call Apex Pest Control or whoever you're using. Have the guy out there and have him just write something to me that says there's no fleas.
Smart.
'Cause they take so long to cure.
Right.
Right? You have to have several treatments over the course of a couple weeks, and during that time, you can't send your cleaners in.
You can send nobody
I
in.
freak out, man. I'm not scared of much, and I'm not scared of fleas, but when I'm standing in a house that I've been in for 20 minutes, and all of a sudden I start getting those bites on my ankles where my socks are, it's disgusting.
Can I tell you?
I
Can I
come
tell you
running
a
out of the
flea?
house like a girl who saw a roach, just freaking out.
Oh, I'm done with fleas. I'm done with fleas.
I keep bug spray in my car when I'm doing walkthroughs for those, and it only happens once or twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
But for those times, I'll be out spraying, and I'm normally wearing a suit, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm spraying a relatively expensive suit with off,
Right.
Kicking my shoes off. The neighbors are going, "What the hell's going on across the street?"
Dude,
It's horrible.
I felt like such a weirdo. I went into a house. It was a house that the owner was putting on the market. So we had the tenants leave. We gave them the notice. And the house needed a lot of work, so it was empty maybe for like a month. Maybe like right at a month. And I go in, I mean, we got to send a crew in to get it ready to be sold. So
Sure.
A lot of people were coming in and out, or were scheduled to come in and out. And we walked in, houses maybe like, I don't know, 1,200 square feet, one level. I walk in through the front door to the back and then work my way up, just like turning on lights. Could not have been in there for more than like 3 minutes, truly. And I was wearing shorts. You wear a suit. That's great. I'm like a jeans and a
Sure.
Being the boss, I'm like, we are not gonna have a dress code.
That's it.
So I was in shorts and a button up, and with an agent, we were walking around. And I just thought, oh my god, like I'm really itching. And I looked down, and there were like bands. It was like two black bands, and the fleas had gotten so bad it took 4 treatments.
Yep.
And it ended up being like $900 in pest control.
So the biggest thing, I come from a company that was pet friendly, and
Super pet friendly.
Sure,
I think.
and my company is pet friendly. I've carried that trend on. My wife works in animal welfare. We're pet owners. I want to allow good pet owners a place to be able to rent with their dog or cat. It's those horrible things like fleas. It doesn't sound that bad if you haven't been through it, but that's what keeps individual landlords from allowing pets.
Right.
And I see it a lot online. People pissed off because all the places are not pet friendly. Most of the calls I get from people looking for houses, that's one of their first lines. I have a German Shepherd, and I can't find any place that will let me rent with a German Shepherd. I got a great job, I got great credit, everything else is fine. But it's because of that. It's because the damage that an animal could do.
It's really expensive.
Not you lose rent, you have to lose money treating it, and you lose time.
But so that I think is a good whole, I think, in the tenant's perspective. You know, when you've never owned a house before, you don't necessarily understand the back end. You don't see the hustle of like, well, because you brought in fleas, I can't send in the painter, I can't send in the realtor, no one can look at this house, I can't send in the HVAC guy. You know, everything is put on hold. We are losing money while also spending money to have your problem fixed.
Yep.
So I think having them sign off is a fantastic idea. I think I'll steal that as well, Al. We're going to be having like super similar businesses now because I'm going to steal all your ideas.
That's okay. That's okay as long as we're doing a good job.
Right.
I think the takeaways here for private landlords is use a free app to document your home and be in agreement with your tenant when you start off. Little things in maintenance can make a difference, like pest control. It's your house. If it's your house, you want to take care of it. I have my own rentals, and they're taken care of. Even if it's my tenant's fault that there's roaches, I still don't want roaches in my house.
Right.
And I don't want to argue with the tenant about it, so I just include quarterly pest control in my rent. Lawn maintenance, I send my guy out personally twice a year. He cleans up the flower beds. He takes care of the gutters. He puts new mulch in because tenants are not going to weed your flower bed
No,
and
they
care
do
about
not
your
care
mulch.
about your house like you care about your
Right.
house.
They'll mow the grass.
Absolutely.
And you're lucky if they trim the bushes.
Yep.
And that's okay. They're
But they're
renting
not
a house.
cleaning gutters.
Right. Very
They're
rarely.
not pressure washing.
That's right. That's right. So I come out of pocket with that, and I suggest any individual landlord that's managing their own home to do that. Just come out of pocket for it because it'll save you so much time in the future.
Yeah. Documentation really is, I think, the biggest thing. Sure. Have photos, have something in writing. Even if you, like, again, we're not promoting Z Inspector. Google free property management walkthrough template. I mean, you can find, there's a myriad of things to find.
Or just call one of us.
Or just call, yeah.
That's
Asheville City Real Estate.
You don't want to deal with all the stuff.
Give us a call.
The best pitch ever.
But I do think, you know, you don't have to do quarterly inspections like we do. I understand that's maybe overkill, but having really strong documentation up front, getting in there at least once midway through should be, I think
if you set
start.
expectations is that's number one. Set the expectations with the tenant. If you're a private landlord, as a property manager, we have things like tenant handbooks and all sorts of addenda and company policies posted clearly on our website. So we have it all already.
I was going to say we also pay really expensive fees every year to have, you know, the legal hotline, access to all of the, you know, the North Carolina and NAR forms. Yeah. So, I mean, we have a pool of things to tap into.
As an individual property owner, though, that's not a realtor, those things aren't available to you all the time. So setting those expectations up front, if you don't have a tenant manual, which you probably don't, I mean, I wouldn't, just have something in writing that lets you know where it's just like going into business with somebody. If you know what your partner's supposed to do and your partner knows what you're supposed to do, chances are you guys are going to end happily, hopefully.
I would also, because you mentioned renting to a friend.
Yeah, it's just like lending them money.
It's
not going to work out.
You can do it. You can rent to your friend, but still run their credit.
Yeah, I one of my rentals is rented to a friend. I took a large security deposit and we signed everything up front. We had that conversation like if this goes bad, it's going to go bad.
Yeah.
And I love him to death. I probably wouldn't do it again, though. It was convenient. It works, and he's taken decent care of the home. Everything's been great so far. But I think that that's not always the case. You get lucky. And sometimes, the horror stories we're talking about are exceptions, not the rule. Most of the time,
super
you get
few
a
and
good
far
tenant,
between.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
they're just easy for us to pull up.
when it's time to release the security deposit, talk to if you're talking to I'm not a property manager. I'm just a guy that owns a house. I've got to make some deductions. They're legal. They're right. They're proper. How do you go about doing that? What would be some advice to give someone?
Oh God! I mean, Jesus. I go back to documentation, not necessarily obviously the walkthrough, but if you have any documentation of work that you did while you were living in the house before you rented it to tenants, just have that handy.
Sure.
Just have it handy.
Do you bring it up to the tenant before you do it, or do you wait till the end and just do it? Is it worth the chance of the argument?
Bringing what up to the tenant?
Well, if you're patching holes, or you're having to send a cleaning crew in because they really legitimately didn't do a good job cleaning, do you tell the tenant, hey man, I'm going to clean and take it out of your deposit up front, or do you wait till the end?
I wait until the end.
Yeah, me too.
I do.
It's just not worth the argument, right?
It's not worth the argument. I've had a couple of, there was one house that was really bad, and I called and I was like, hey, you told me you spent a lot of time cleaning. Ugh, and I'm sure you're so tired. How long? How many hours? And she was like, I would say upwards of 2. And I'm like, okay, I get it. So really setting up the expectation for an owner that knows nothing about it. I mean, hire a property manager.
I would some of the tips I would throw out there would be to obviously document everything, specifically the things that you're fixing. Take before and after pictures. In North Carolina, you have a set amount of time that you have to get that deposit back to the tenant.
Yep.
So if you're working a full-time job and you're also being your own property manager and you're trying to get something fixed, it may take you a few weeks to get it done. Know that you have a ticking clock, right? Within 30 days, you have to get a disposition to the tenant.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to be final, but you have to tell them within 30 days what's going on with their deposit. And if you don't, you could land in serious legal hot water. 3 times the tenant's deposit's at risk.
Yep.
So 30 days sounds like a really long time to do a paint job and a cleaning and a couple little pieces of maintenance. But if you're working full time and trying to get that done, 30 days is almost not enough time.
If you're working full time, you're managing your own properties, and you also live in a city with super kind of like low unemployment. It's hard to find a contractor in Asheville.
Yeah, no doubt.
A good one. Roofers are 6 weeks out.
Yeah.
Painters sometimes are 3 weeks out. So, I like 30 days sounds like a really long time, but coordinating everything and getting it back out to the tenants is...
Even as a professional with people that we use all the time, it can be challenging.
Yeah.
Especially in COVID. I had to write more extensions, 30-day extensions,
right.
Than I've ever done before, just because COVID has backed everything up. Our painters are 3 or 4 weeks out. What do? You just got to tell the tenant, I'm sorry. And with COVID especially, people are a little more concerned about their money. Not that they weren't before, but now if you've got $3,000 tied up in a past rental, you want that back.
Oh, God. Sometimes you really need it back.
So with COVID and deposits, have you seen anything aside from the extreme cases? I feel as a property manager, even with the laws, the CARES Act, the executive orders, the eviction moratoriums, the court shutting down for a little bit, the moratorium on writs of possession, we have had to date, or at least as far as when I was with the last company I was with before I opened my own place, I only had two, maybe three, but two horrible cases where one of them was the only case where someone actually took advantage of it. And I see this a lot in the political stuff going back and forth. It's the big argument against the eviction moratorium is that people are going to take advantage of it. They're just not going to pay rent. And I found that wasn't the case at all. All of my tenants either struggled but kept up, made payments, figured something out, stayed in contact with us, and we allowed for it gracefully and compassionately, and we were able to get through it. I had one person, talk about a horror story, I had to file eviction. He wasn't paying rent. He couldn't pay it. There was nothing we could do, and he wouldn't leave. So I had to file. I won eviction in court. The court gave him 10 to 14 days to remove from the property. And then once that date hits is when you file for a writ of possession to get the cops to come out and do it for you if they haven't left.
Right.
So I called the tenant a couple times prior, like I normally do, and say, hey, listen, we've got like 3 days left, man. I just need you don't even got to turn in the key. Just let me know you're gone. I don't want to have to go make this spectacle like this. I don't want to do this. I don't get any joy in this.
It can be really quick if you make it really quick.
It sucks for me. We're at this point, though. Let's just call it even and get out of here. And he didn't. And the morning of, I called him to see if he was still in the house, and he answered the phone, and I was probably around 10:30 in the morning. And I said, hey, man, I'm heading down to the courthouse. I can't wait any longer. Give me an update. Give me something to work with here. And he said, well, you can't do anything. The court's shut down. I was there this morning, and they said you can't throw me out, so I'm staying. And he was right. And he stayed for, and don't quote me on this, but it was about 6 months, rent-free. And the house was, it was trash. We had to rip up the wood floor. It couldn't be refinished in spots. Full paint job. The deck had to be repaired. There was holes in the drywall. It was disgusting. It was so bad. And that was the only one. And that's when I hear the political talk, that was the only time it happened. And it was so bad. And there was nothing I could do. Paying me as a property manager when the court shut down, I can't do anything about it except take your phone call every 2 weeks and hear you yell at me
and tell you the same thing. I'm really sorry. I can't do anything.
So, but other than that, other than the extreme,
of course,
I found that most tenants, all of them, they made good on it. They understood that just because they didn't have to pay rent at the moment, it wasn't that they didn't have to. It was just unenforceable for the moment.
Right.
They still owed it.
Yeah. For us, I think our biggest win throughout COVID in 2020 was just being extremely communicative. I mean, I would say probably end of February, beginning of March when we all started. That's when we started, I think working from home. I mean, God, I don't even know anymore.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, we sent out a letter to the tenants that was like, we have nothing to do with your rent. Essentially, I can't give you a discount. Everything's got to be sent up to the owner, but we will work with you. It's a really hard time, and it's hard when someone is really doing their best and still can't come up with it.
It's even worse when you know it's not their fault. Like
Totally.
Not
And
not that it's ever their fault, but crap happens in life. But when COVID just comes and kicks you out of your job and you didn't have any money saved, like most of us, we have very little in the bank, right?
Yeah.
This came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, and I just think coming at it from a human aspect, like it's nice to be a small company because there's not really that corporate feel.
That's right,
when we emailed, 250 tenants, it was coming from me and my business partner. So there was a face to the relief, if that makes sense.
Well, his property managers were pretty gruff, right? It's easier to not have any play. Because tenants will take advantage of it, and you spend time arguing with tenant after tenant on something when it's just easier to say, this is the way it is. It's in your lease. I'm sorry, but that's it. Let's
play
move
or
on.
don't.
Yeah, let's move on. It's hard because you typically get a reputation for being a little more gruff, but it's really part of the job. When COVID hit, it changed that, at least for me, because it allowed me the ability to be empathetic to a tenant that couldn't pay rent. We had owners that allowed tenants to paint. They lost a roommate, so they painted the house and they took a little bit off every month to cover what their roommate would have covered during COVID.
Nice.
We had owners, and we encouraged owners that if a tenant couldn't pay rent, to allow them to terminate their lease without penalty. Use part of their deposit to cover some of the rent that they owed, or just give them their deposit back.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it wasn't worth we were hurting as a species, right? It wasn't just they're a bad tenant. It was that this happened to all of us.
That all of COVID was a really, really great example, I think, of how people view landlords.
Yeah.
Because
we got to be nice for once, right?
Oh my God. I'm like, I got to send a nice email that didn't have any like vitriol behind it. We heard from a lot of tenants, and some tenants even that like had no problem at all paying their rent. All the rent was coming in, as it should, that reached out and just said like, I really appreciate you guys sending a letter saying you'll help. It was interesting to have to clue them in on maybe necessarily why we weren't able to help as much as they would like.
Right. They suddenly realize that we're not actually the owner of the house, right?
Well,
we're just doing their bidding.
Not only are we not the owner, and that was a really and we also sent in that letter like the role of a property manager. Right. This is my job. This is what my job title is. I work for them, and this is what my duties are. So kind of to curb the slumlord aspect, because it's, when I get a call from a tenant that says I'm 2 months behind on rent and I can't pay, but the owner calls and says, I called my mortgage company and they're not providing any relief.
Right. It's a tough
whose
spot.
side do you, where do you lie?
I had one tenant, maybe two, but I had one that was very bitter about the entire thing. And I was unfortunately the target. And I remember them saying, well, what are you doing about it? What are you going to do to help us? Why aren't you doing more? And I put a blog together on my website that listed all the different places you could get help, from the One Bunkum Fund to New Belgium stuff to every place that I could find that you could get money. I didn't need it, but I was doing that so I could give it to my tenants.
I was going to say, that's what we did.
I work with the owners. I do everything that I can, and they were just so bitter about the whole situation that when I offered help, they turned it around saying, oh, well, Al told me where I could get charity. And I'm like, well, I'm not. Like, I'm literally just trying to help you.
Also, not to be rude, but you need it right now.
And to relate that back to what you just said with the role of a property manager, it isn't my job. It isn't.
It's not my money.
Right?
It's not my money. The $1,700 you're paying, not only is it not mine, the owner doesn't necessarily rake that in.
Yeah.
That's something we tried to highlight. Like, okay, you're paying $1,500 in rent. 12 of that may be the mortgage. These, you know what I mean? Like, these owners most of the time are not raking it in.
Yeah.
They're paying for the home that you're not.
We'll have a good podcast on that, whether single family versus multifamily, and how to actually make money owning rental property instead of just trying to gain equity in the future. But to kind of wrap it up, because I don't want this thing to go on forever, and we could sit here all night. We'll just get another bottle of bourbon and get a cab home. The last thing I want to talk about is security deposits and long-term tenancy. In my world, long-term tenants are a bad thing. In a normal now, as a property manager, as a investment property owner, long-term tenants are a good thing. But it comes with the understanding of being a property manager that I can make that a good thing.
Right.
So I've got my own views on long-term tenancy, not the tenants themselves, but tenancy. Tell me what you think.
We're not a fan.
No.
We're not a fan. We kind of got bit by a 2-year lease of a really expensive home in Biltmore Park. Ended up having to go through an eviction. And it was a real pain to get her out because of it was before my time. But
Sure.
My business partner said it was really difficult because there were X amount of months left on the lease. $14,000 worth of damage.
Ooh.
Judge Joe did not give the owner a penny.
Wow.
So that tenant in particular has kind of I don't like to do long term. The house that the owner's really trying to get every penny of the deposit. Those were 10-year tenants.
Sure.
We have a house that they've been in, we have several tenants actually that have probably been there for like 7 to 10 years.
Sure.
Houses aren't in great condition. If these guys ever move, you're looking at a lot of work.
Yep.
Because the deferred maintenance that you want to do aesthetically, it's hard to lay new floors with a tenant in there.
Yep.
It's hard to do an interior paint job when you got stuff everywhere because the tenants probably aren't gonna prep like you would want it.
That's
so
right. Yeah.
we tried to get them. I hate to say get them out every few years, but after 5 years, we're starting to look at like what can we do to improve to get more money to make it better.
Well, you're looking at it from the client standpoint, and that's your job, right?
Yeah.
Your job is to look after the property in its best interests, even if you have great tenants. As a property manager, as we understand deferred maintenance, a lot of times we can make if we got great tenants and they're taking great care of the place and they understand and are willing to work with you, it makes long-term tenancy great. But for a private individual owning a single-family home or two, it's almost the unicorn that they're like, oh, my tenant's been in there for 15 years. And the first thing that comes to my head is, oh, my God, you are going to be in trouble when they move out.
I was going to say, that's going to sink you financially.
Right. You
How much you have to
done
do.
very little walkthroughs. As long as the tenant pays rent on time, you're staying out of his business and he's not blowing your phone up, and you've got the perfect tenant in your mind. Because that's the template for a normal professional landlord who owns 1 or 2 houses. The tenant doesn't bug you, nothing's horribly wrong with your home, and your rent comes in every month on the 1st, and you don't raise rent, you took a 1-month deposit. The deferred maintenance is building. It's building every month. So I've found the biggest problems with long-term tenancy is not only deferred maintenance, but you end up with undervalued rent because you don't raise the rent because you got a good tenant, and then 5 years down the road, you can't raise it $200 on them. Fear of vacancy is something that I see happening with owners who have long-term tenants because suddenly they forget what it's like not to have that income. And they're scared to death that the house is going to sit vacant for a month or two.
During COVID, what was really interesting to see the tenants or the owners that did have long-term tenants, when rent wasn't coming in, they go, well, why don't these tenants have any money in savings?
Yeah.
It's like, you've been getting $1,200 a month for 9 years.
Yeah.
Have you been prepping?
That's the worst line ever. Why don't they have something in
Why don't I have
savings? That irks me because I work for the person who says it, and I just want to look back at them and go, well, why don't you have it? Like, this hurt all of us. Nobody saw it coming. If we had all seen it coming a year down the road, then that line would be applicable, right? Like, everyone knew this was going to happen. You should have saved some money.
Yeah.
But no one knew that. So the other thing that I find is entitlement. And I know that's kind of some scary ground to tread on. I don't want to offend anybody, but I find that when I take over a property or I have a tenant in a property for 7 years or I take over one that's been there for 5 years, I'm like the new kid on the block. They're like, yo, I've been here for 7 years. You're not showing me nothing. Hey, I've dealt with that drippy toilet or that leaky toilet.
Do you come in hot? Do you come in and say, like, this is what we're doing?
I try to come in really nice the first time. And then it depends on how they treat me.
Yeah.
If I get a bunch of flack, then I will just say, listen, the owner hired us because they don't want to deal with you. Like, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we do it, and we can get along great, but it's different from what you were doing, and we realize that, and we're willing to allow a little bit of latitude for you to get used to paying rent on the 1st instead of the 15th, for you to understand that we are going to show up at your house, and we have the right to enter and take pictures. Entitlement. The entitlement that I get sometimes is a lot of pushback. So we always come in nice, and then if we get that entitlement feel, because there's a lot of that, and sometimes it's true. Like a tenant will be like, man, I've been here for 10 years. They never bothered fixing the leaky toilet before. Now all of a sudden you're here telling me I need to pay rent on the 1st instead of the 15th. And so, you got to kind of come in and say, listen, we're here to change that. We're not here just to enforce rules. We're here to make sure the house is taken care of properly too. And the last owner realized maybe they were in over their head. So I spin it a little bit as much as I can and it's an honest spin. I'm not lying to them.
Right.
We're going to fix that stuff. Tell me what's wrong. Let's fix it. And then we're going to probably raise your rent and go forward into a new lease.
Something with security deposits that really kills me is when we get a call, we've given the disposition to them. We've explained everything, why we charged it. And they go, well, that was happening for like 8 months.
Right.
You're like, but I never had a work order. I don't live in the house.
Yeah,
I don't know these intricacies of
if you
drafty windows or something's broken. If you have written record,
sure, I'll take it off. It's my fault then. If you
totally
told me and I missed it, it's quite possible. I've made a mistake before. I won't, this is the only time I'll admit it.
Right.
But if you
on
emailed
record.
me and there was a shitstorm that day of clients and tenants and craziness happening, and you sent me an email going, hey man, my shower's dripping. It's not a big deal. Just kind of wanted to let you know. Hope your day's going well. And I got that in the midst of 80 other emails, and I'm literally putting out actual fires, right? Like a kitchen fire.
Legitimate fires.
I might have filed that in my brain like, okay, I can handle this tomorrow. I've got to dedicate my time to this. And then tomorrow turns into the next day and the next day, and you're okay. I'm okay with my shower dripping. My shower is dripping right now. Literally, I shut my bathroom door at night because it drips once every like 5 minutes, and my wife, it'll annoy the crap out of her. So typical, I just shut the door.
Right.
It fixed it.
Everything's fine. If you don't hear it,
it's fine. Oh my goodness. So I don't do that with my rental properties. Right. But it's legitimate for someone to have that. And if you can show me the email, and I'll admit I'm wrong, which is why I've made it my personal mantra that I'm not ever going to be too much of a butthead unless I absolutely 100% know that I'm completely right. Because the worst thing that can ever happen to me, which is it happened to me once with that tenant that I talked about earlier that kind of faced me, said, you can't evict me. And I said, well, watch me.
Right.
You just
coming in hot and then hitting a wall is real. It's a hard pill to swallow.
It still like heats me a little bit. And he was right. But I should have not come in as hot because I thought I was right.
Right.
And since then too, it's been constant unless I absolutely know I'm right, and then I'm going to explain to you that I'm right, and let me show you why. And if we can get around this rationally, we will. Otherwise, some people don't like to be rational, and that's when our job turns hard.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask about kind of the transfer from an old property to you guys, right? From an old management company to y'all. How do you handle getting the money from the owner in terms of putting it in your escrow account, and how do you handle the tenant saying, I mean, you kind of spoke on it, but specifically about the security deposit, well, the old owner wouldn't have done that, or we talked about this years ago. That's
hard because to me it's a really rational train of thought that I'm not your old owner. It's sort of, to me, when someone's my old owner, my old boss wouldn't have done that. Well, I'm not your old boss.
Right.
Like, this is new. So the deposit comes over the day that our management agreement starts. Mm-hmm. It goes straight into our trust account. A notice goes out to the tenant saying that we've received it, how much it is, and just basically goes over the numbers with them and lets them know that we're holding it and what bank we're holding it in.
Yeah.
And sometimes there'll be a little bit more attached to it about Landlord-Tenant Act and security deposits and things like that. It's not always. Just as long as we notify them that we got it. It's a nice form. It's pre-populated. Yeah. We just type in the numbers and the rest of it's there. And then we typically will sign them to a new lease. If they're still in a lease with the last owner, then we try not to, especially if it's like a lease they got off Zoom or one of these places.
Right.
It's not an North Carolina Real Estate Commission
It's
approved
essentially
lease.
written on a napkin.
Yeah. It may not be legal. A lot of the leases I get, though there's nothing wrong with them, they're not hurting anybody. The wording or what's in them isn't legal. They're charging too much in late fees, or they're not giving the tenant the appropriate amount of time to pay, or they just don't know.
Or there are loopholes that the tenant can use that don't benefit you, the owner.
Sure.
There are giant gaps in what you can do legally
So
with this
we'll bring them
lease.
right into our new lease. If they're in the middle of an old lease, then we take it as it comes. We'll
Sure.
typically play pretty gentle if it's not our lease, just because I can't enforce a lease. I'm not a lawyer. If it's not North Carolina Real Estate Commission lease, I don't know whether it's legal, and I'm not going to make a judgment on it. Not even to my client. I'm just going to say,
Right.
listen, as soon as this one expires, we're going to get them in a new one, unless they'll re-sign a new one now. So sometimes an easy way to do that is there's 6 months left on your lease, Kyle. We're the new management company. I'm going to sign you to a new full-year lease at the same amount you're paying now. Otherwise, at the end of your 6 months, we're most likely going to do a rate increase and sign you to a new year lease.
Interesting. Okay.
So if you're happy where you're at and you want to stay for another year, let's get you on our new lease. Let's lock in what you're paying now so you don't have to worry about that rate increase until next year, and go forward. And a lot of times that helps, because you're doing the tenant a solid if they want to stick around. And not that it's all the time, but most properties that come to me are undervalued.
Yeah.
The owners don't realize how much they could be charging in rent. Or some of them have told me not to go up in rent, that they want to keep an affordable place for people to live. And I love that too. That's awesome.
great.
It makes my job so much easier too. I can rent your place 5 times as fast. I'll have a line of people out the door wanting to rent it. Most people don't do that, but I've had it happen.
How do you handle, and then I promise I'm done.
It's okay. We've only been here for about an hour. So.
Okay, that's okay. So keep the bourbon flowing. You have an owner maybe doing it herself. I'm asking for a friend.
Right. Okay.
She's doing it herself. So, security deposit's $500. That was just a number she threw around. Rent's $1,200. She calls us and says, I'd like you to manage. Do I increase the security deposit to what I normally would?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a rough answer because the road's going to be hard.
Sometimes you don't have that extra $800.
Yeah, no matter what you do, it's going to be a hard road. If you leave it alone at $500, you're gonna hate it in the end. And if you try to increase it, you're going to get pushback from the tenant. So we had one of these exact situations come over where we took over management, and there was no security deposit. Zero. They just moved in, started paying rent, and the rent was undervalued, seriously undervalued. And it was such a nice lady. And we had to not only tell her that rent was going up, but that she had to pay even more on a deposit. So the way we structured it, which was still rough for her, but she was able to pull it off, was she paid a little bit over rent every month, and that overage we put into the trust account as her deposit until it hit a certain amount, and we sent her records of that. And then by the time it was all said and done, she had paid, I think it was only a 1-month deposit. We didn't go as much as we normally did. The house was in great shape, and the circumstances that she was in for the home made it even more like we needed to kind of help her get to where she needed to be.
Yeah.
So that's how we handled it. We just tacked on an extra $100 or $200 a month to pay this part off, and it's tenants' money. They get that back. It just you don't always have that.
It really is for the protection of the owner.
So lots of takeaways for do-it-yourself landlords. It certainly can be done. Lots of people are doing it. I encourage it. I also encourage professional help, though. When you don't know what you're doing, call somebody. I know that you take calls all the time. I do as well. One of the reasons I want to do this podcast is just to kind of put some easy information out there. I don't know that I would sit through an hour-long podcast on property management, specifically about security deposits, without drinking a very large amount. But this has been extremely fun.
Yeah,
and Kyle, you're with City Real Estate.
Asheville City Real Estate.
Pitch yourself real quick.
Asheville City Real Estate. We manage 170 properties. We've got 5 sales agents. We are ready for your business, and I promise we will do a great job.
We
have already.
There are lots of property management companies in Asheville. There are lots of real estate agents in Asheville. And one thing is for sure, that they're not all great. All the ones that I talk to, we all do a good job. We all share information. This kind of conversation happens a lot behind the scenes, especially when we have an issue we need to work out that we've never done before.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a pool of other local business people that you can call and go, hey, has this ever happened? What did you do? How did it work out?
One of the coolest things that came out of COVID was the Facebook group that we made.
Right. Yeah.
It was like 6 or 8 maybe property managers owned their own business. And throughout that time, my business partner and I kept saying or using the phrase like community over competition. It was so nice to get on a Zoom every week and go, okay, this is what we're up against. What about y'all?
I've never looked at you or any of the other people that I'm friends with as competition. It's very weird. It's the first business I've been in where people call me and I give them my rate and I give them my pitch and they go, well, we want to call around, and I'll tell them where to go.
Yeah.
Here, call these guys. Like,
yes.
I'm confident in what I do, and I know that I'm going to provide you a great level of service, but I know that there's competitors out there that do really well as well. There's also ones that don't.
Right.
There are the horror stories of property managers that aren't doing walkthroughs, that are letting things slide because it makes their life easier, that don't communicate. And those are the big red flags.
Yeah.
So if you're searching for a property manager, check out Kyle at City Real Estate. Obviously, check me out as well, 828 Home Rentals or alsartorellirealestate.com. Either of us would be happy to talk to you at any time. I make a business of answering questions for regular landlords, and hopefully you got something out of this podcast. Thanks.